He was smacked and filed for divorce when I claimed he appeared to be a muscleless youngster. Who does that, like? I'm 28-year-old Lindsay, and I never imagined that I would be sitting here sharing this tale. But here I am. 5 years ago, while I was working at this bar downtown, I met Kyle. He was a thin guy with a kind grin who tipped well and paid attention to what I had to say. He wasn't like those gym boys with their protein shakes and biceps. I found it refreshing back then. Someone who had a steady government job with benefits, including real health insurance, and wasn't preoccupied with his appearance. It amazed my broke, minimum wage butt. We made good progress. After 6 months of dating, we moved into this adorable small apartment, which, to be honest, was a huge improvement over my previous flat with 3 roommates. Since Kyle earned significantly more than I did in my retail job, he paid the majority of the rent, and I was perfectly happy with that arrangement. After all, I was already saving money to launch my own company. I have a ton of ideas, like starting my own makeup brand, wellness coaching, and an online boutique. I simply have to see which one would become viral on TikTok first. Anyway, for a time, everything was going well. When I used my wages to buy new clothes or makeup for my future influencer job rather than to help pay for groceries or utilities, Kyle was kind, trustworthy, and never complained. However, in contrast to these athletic guys I followed on Instagram, I began to notice things like how his arms were essentially twigs and how his clothing hung off him like he was a coat hanger. When my FYP first started displaying couples to me, it wasn't really a problem. The guy in these pairings looked like he could bench press a car, and I was with Kyle, who looked like he would have trouble carrying a big backpack. At first, I attempted to be subtle. I would email him transformation tapes or tag him in fitness videos. I would attempt to encourage Kyle by saying, "This could be you," but he would either laugh it off or claim he didn't have time between work and helping his parents out around the house. In any case, I felt like I was missing out on these ideal relationships as I continued to scroll through my feed and watch them develop in 60-second bursts. After that, Kyle's workplace hosted a corporate dinner. With the money I was meant to be saving for my business, I purchased this stunning dress, but it's vital to invest in your appearance, isn't it? I couldn't help but notice how Kyle's suit practically hung off him when he came out wearing it. When I replied, "You look like a teenager playing dress-up in his dad's clothes," I instantly felt bad about it after noticing his expression change. However, I doubled down instead of apologizing. "I'm just saying maybe if you put on some muscle, you wouldn't look like you're drowning in fabric." I could sense a change that evening. Kyle kept quiet during the dinner, and I found myself praising him for his stability when the spouses of his co-workers inquired about us. And goodwill, but add these small jabs about his body. I would joke, "He may not be able to open jars for Ikai. Me, but he sure can file my taxes," and everyone would chuckle as Kyle grinned broadly. I didn't share any selfies with Kyle, but I did upload a couple from the restroom. As if I were more than just a retail employee with aspirations, my caption focused entirely on networking and commercial relationships. He asked me whether I was embarrassed by him on the way home. He could try a little harder, I told him, but I wasn't. I showed him these couples with guys who all had the appearance of Marvel superheroes. "Look at my feed," I added. He glanced out the window the entire way home without saying anything. "Don't you want us to be like that? Don't you want me to be proud to show you off?" He claimed to have a headache and slept on the couch that night. I liked videos of personal trainers and wondered why Kyle couldn't just try harder for me while I browsed TikTok until 3 in the morning. After a few weeks, I saw that Kyle had begun going to the gym. I observed him packing his gym clothes one evening, but he didn't make a big deal out of it. Rather than offering encouragement, I rolled my eyes and quipped, "Finally decided to do something about those twig arms." He simply zipped up his bag and walked away without saying anything. I wrinkled my nose and instructed him to take a shower right away when he got home, sweating profusely. I didn't support him or inquire how it went. In hindsight, perhaps I ought to have, but I was irritated that he took so long to make an effort. I didn't notice any changes, but Kyle continued to go to the gym 3 times a week. After a month, I informed him, most people see results by now. I wasn't persuaded, even if he murmured something about it needing time. In the meantime, I was gaining more TikTok followers by sharing films of everyday life and office turmoil, carefully positioning the camera to conceal our small flat. Kyle was hardly mentioned in my content, so what was the purpose? He wasn't the type of person who would spread the word about my videos. We established a routine. Kyle would make supper after a long day at the office, and I would finish my retail shifts, come home, and spend hours scrolling and brainstorming content. When he asked me about my day, I would watch videos and give him half answers. I would nod along without paying any attention as he discussed his work. He would occasionally recommend weekend activities, like going hiking, attending a local festival, or even just having a movie night, but I would typically respond that I needed to produce material or look into potential business ventures. As Kyle read a book or worked on a project at home, I would actually find myself using my phone to watch other people's lives. Although Kyle was responsible for all the maintenance, the flat was officially ours. While I criticized his efficiency or voiced my displeasure over the way he folded my things, he did the laundry, took out the garbage, and cleaned the toilet. He would gently remind me of my share when expenses were due, and I would swear to reimburse him once my business took off. He paid for everything himself in silence and never pushed it. Now I realize how much I exploited his patience. The BBQ with his pal took a serious turn for the worse. There were all of the partners, including one guy named Mark, who obviously lived at the gym. I ended up sitting with the other women while the boys were grilling, and somehow Kyle ended up being the subject. "He's such a sweetie," I continued, "but honestly, there are times when I feel like I'm dating a high school kid." The man has a string beans muscular build. One of the women looked at Kyle as they both chuckled nervously. He was within earshot, I realized. Despite the obvious pain in his eyes, I doubled down rather than apologized. Kyle approached me that night, and I became defensive. "You know it's true, babe. Maybe Mark can give you some pointers." "Do you know how much that hurt Lindsay in front of everyone?" Kyle asked. He questioned whether I was still attracted to him, saying, "If you're this sensitive about it, maybe do something about it." "I'm just being honest. Would you rather I lie?" He left after I paused for too long before responding. I saw him tighten his thin arms and look defeated as he stared at himself in the bathroom mirror that night. I felt irritated rather than sorry. How come he couldn't just get more muscular like the guys on my feed? I felt like I was settling with someone, so why was I stuck with them? I didn't specifically mention Kyle in my TikTok on relationship standards the following day, but anyone who knew us would know exactly who I was referring to. It received more views than any previous post I had made. The wonderful feeling of affirmation overpowered the voice that kept telling me that I was being unkind. Things at home were tight for the following few weeks. Kyle retreated, working late or going to the gym more. It was okay, I assured myself. More time to concentrate on expanding my fan base. Kyle was using his credit card constantly and wasn't cooking as much, so I started ordering takeout more. When he brought up money, I would remind him of all the business ventures I was working on that would undoubtedly succeed in the near future. I also showed him illustrations of possible logos for my most recent concept, which was personalized water bottles with inspirational sayings. He no longer showed much attention or offered to help. He simply nodded. My friend Amber kept asking me if Kyle and I were getting along while we were shopping one weekend. "He seems different lately," she observed, more distant. I dismissed her comments, attributing it to his newfound love with the gym. Rolling my eyes, I charged another outfit to the emergency credit card Kyle had given me. "He's probably just tired from all the pointless lifting," I muttered. I shared mirror selfies in my new attire that evening, along with remarks about investing in oneself and dressing to fit the role. Kyle didn't say anything, as he usually did when he saw me snapping the photos. I was annoyed by his quiet. Did he not intend to give me a compliment? Everything fell apart over the weekend. To celebrate his coworker's promotion, Kyle and I received an invitation to this downtown bar. It took me 3 hours to prepare. While Kyle waited patiently, Reddy changed 5 times and applied a complete face of cosmetics. I was so confident that I even made a get ready with me video. I barely acknowledged the folks Kyle introduced me to as soon as we got there, scanning the room for picturesque areas and taking selfies. I became louder and more enthusiastic after having a few drinks, especially while interacting with the party's more attractive men. While I was on my fourth cocktail, which he obviously paid for, Kyle remained silent the entire night, sipping the same beer. When his coworker James and his girlfriend arrived, she exclaimed that they had just returned from a hike. As I told the gathering, Kyle's not really the outdoorsy type. Everyone chuckled uneasily as Kyle's cheeks turned scarlet. He'd probably get winded walking up a hill, I added. I'm just keeping it real, after noticing his look. It's not like you could carry me if I twisted my ankle, unlike James here. I gave James a pat on his visibly toned arm. I continued to make these jokes about Kyle as the evening wore on. An intoxicated man knocked into me and spilled his beer on my new top as the bar grew busier. Watch it, I yelled. He spun around and got in my face. He was massive like a linebacker. He snarled, "What did you say to me?" Kyle moved to the side before I could answer. The sight of my scrawny hubby attempting to tackle this human mountain nearly made me giggle. Kyle, clearly terrified, remarked, "She didn't mean anything by it," in a steady voice. The huge guy smirked as he looked Kyle up and down and said, "Let's all just enjoy our night." I should have diffused the situation by asking, "Is this your boyfriend, this little boy?" But instead, I rolled my eyes. I said, "Tell me about it," loud enough for them both to hear. Kyle's expression went blank as the man chuckled, and I knew then that I had crossed a line that I couldn't get back. Kyle's voice tightened as he replied, "I apologize to my wife." The man's laughter increased. It happened so quickly after that. "Or what, string bean?" Kyle attempted to shove the man away, but before I knew it, the large man had delivered 2 forceful blows. Blood poured from Kyle's nose as he fell. Kyle sat on the sticky bar floor, cradling his face while bouncers hurried over and dragged the other guy out. I'm not proud of this, but my initial inclination was to reach for my phone to see whether anyone had recorded what had happened, not to seek assistance. Can you picture the scenery? However, when I looked into Kyle's eyes, I noticed a difference. Refusing assistance, he got up and used the back of his hand to wipe the blood from his face. I couldn't help but make things worse in the Uber home. I hissed, "What were you thinking?" "You could have just walked away. You know you can't fight." Kyle stared straight ahead, mute. I went on, "This is so embarrassing." Everyone saw. Everyone's probably talking about it right now. Kyle immediately headed to the restroom as soon as we arrived home. I did the same. "You should have just let it go," I remarked, leaning against the doorframe while he was cleaning blood off his face. Kyle stared at me in the glass, his eyes unreadable, and said, "It's not like anyone expected you to actually do anything. You're not exactly the hero type." He said softly, "Would you have preferred if I'd let him continue?" I didn't immediately respond to the question. "Would that have been less embarrassing for you?" Simply said, "Trying to battle someone 3 times your size wasn't a good move. What were your expectations?" Neither that night nor the following, Kyle went to bed. He woke up earlier than I did, slept on the couch, and arrived home late. He hardly spoke when he was at home, glued to his laptop or phone. I made an effort to appear regular by sharing my typical stuff and working on my most recent business venture, which is making personalized phone cases with motivational sayings. When I asked Kyle if he could get me some cash for supplies, he replied that he was reevaluating our business plan, whatever that meant. It was strangely calm the week following the bar incident. Kyle left early for work and returned home late, hardly speaking to me. More calls were being taken by him outside or in the spare room we used for storage, I noted. I was momentarily concerned when he mentioned a lawyer, but I ignored it. Kyle refused to abandon me. Where would I reside? How would I make purchases? We had been together for 5 years, nevertheless. That isn't something you throw away after a terrible night. I went shopping to lift my spirits and purchased some pricey skincare items from a brand I had seen everywhere on TikTok. I was taken aback when the payment card was refused. I gave Kyle a call right away. I insisted, "Why is the card not working?" He said in a chilly tone, "I need these things for my content." I was incensed. "I canceled that card yesterday. I should have done it months ago. How am I supposed to build my business without the right products? I shouted. He hung up, really hung up on me. The validation didn't feel as nice as it used to when I wrote a vague tirade against unsupportive spouses that received a lot of sympathetic comments. About a week after the bar incident, Kyle was on a video call when I got home one evening. When I entered, he abruptly halted it. I said, "Who is that?" He said, "Financial advisor," quickly. "Since when do we have a financial advisor?" I said. "We don't," he answered back. "I do." I was troubled by that, but I ignored it. In any case, I needed him to send the rent money. He claimed to have already paid his share to the landlord immediately when I brought it up. "Your half is due tomorrow," he said, not raising his head from his computer. "My half?" I stammered out. I was astonished when Kyle finally turned to face me and said, "Your portion is $800. I've been covering it for 3 years. Not anymore." "Since when do I pay half? You know I'm saving for my business." Late into the night, we quarreled. I labeled him self-centered and told him that once my business took off, it would be good for both of us. He simply had a worn-out appearance. He said, 3 years, Lindsay, repeatedly. He's a cosmetics artist and never started any of these enterprises. 3 years of paying for everything while you buy clothes. I told him he was being theatrical and that couples constantly make jokes about each other after he had been denigrated and emasculated for 3 years. He simply returned to the couch without answering. I felt a little better after posting a mysterious TikTok about men not helping female entrepreneurs, which had a respectable amount of interaction. When I woke up the following morning, Kyle had left with his laptop and workout bag. I thought he had left early for work once more. I noticed that my most recent TikTok had received a lot of attention overnight when I checked my phone. I briefly forgot about our argument as I spent the day creating fresh content ideas and answering comments. I was so sure that this would be the business that finally took off that I even started looking for sources for those motivational phone cases. In the hopes that they would tell their followers about my designs, I compiled a list of all the influencers I would send free merchandise to. I became concerned that evening when Kyle failed to return home. When I tried to call him, the call went straight to voicemail. His pals said they had no idea where he was when I texted them. Even when I phoned his parents, they seemed strangely unsurprised and indicated that if they heard from him, they would let him know I had called. Everyone was behaving as though they knew something I didn't, which was strange. Kyle never showed up during the night, so I kept an eye on our front door and jumped whenever I heard footsteps in the hallway. Kyle was seated at the kitchen table, with a folder in front of him when I got home from work 2 weeks after the bar incident. His words, "We need to talk," had a new voice, one that was colder and more distant. Anticipating another discussion about bills, I sat down. He slid the folder in my direction instead. Divorce papers were inside. My heart stopped beating. "What is this?" I inquired, despite the fact that it was clear. "I'm done, Lindsay," was all he said. I've been unhappy for a long time, and the other night made me realize it's never going to change. I was speechless. This was not intended to occur. Kyle was my safety net as I figured out my career since he was reliable and steady. I said, "You can't do this," as my anxiety increased. He shook his head, saying, "We can work on things. I'll be better." I started crying, a mixture of real hurt and the kind of strategic tears that normally worked on him. "I've already found a new place," he said. "I've paid next month's rent here to give you time to figure things out. After that, it's on you." This time, he did nothing except observe me. I cried, "What about all our plans?" At that, Kyle really chuckled and asked, "What about my business?" "What business, Lindsay? You've had a new idea every month for 3 years and never followed through on any of them. Meanwhile, I've paid for everything. Rent, utilities, groceries, your car insurance. I've supported you while you spent your money on clothes and makeup for social media posts." His remarks struck me like a blow. I argued, "That's not fair." He got up and grabbed a suitcase I hadn't noticed by the entrance, saying, "I'm building my brand. These things take time. Additionally, I have deleted you from both my credit cards and bank accounts." The reality was sinking in when he continued. The car is in my name, so you'll need to find alternative transportation by the end of the month. No, Kyle meant that I had no safety net and no one to help with the bills when I was on my own. I screamed, "You can't just leave me with nothing," as genuine terror began to set in. Kyle stopped at the door and said, "I gave you 3 years of my life, and I gave you 3 years of financial support while you belittled me and made me feel worthless," he whispered quietly. He left after saying, "I'm done being your ATM and emotional punching bag." I uploaded a heartfelt TikTok about being abandoned right away, and it went viral faster than anything I had ever uploaded. "You deserve better, Queen," and "his loss" were among the encouraging remarks that flooded in, but they were unable to quell the panic. How might I pay for this apartment? Rent and electricity were barely paid by my income, let alone my phone bill and shopping habits. The days following Kyle's departure were a haze of anxious job hunts and panic attacks. I spent hours looking at job postings that all seemed to need talents I didn't have as I called in sick to work for 3 days in a row. When I asked friends for loans, most of them gave me far less than I needed or made excuses. At last, a buddy revealed the terrible reality to me. Both in person and on social media, people had witnessed my treatment of Kyle. Now they weren't particularly keen to assist me. The landlord was adamant about the deadline, despite my attempts to bargain for extra time. The landlord simply shook his head when I brought up Kyle's name in the hopes of eliciting sympathy. I couldn't believe Kyle had already spoken to him. "Kyle already explained the situation. The apartment lease transfers to your name next month, or you move out." He seemed to have spent weeks organizing this. I frantically called Kyle's parents. His mother responded, but she came across as unusually icy. "We've always treated you like family, Lindsay," she stated. "But we've also seen how you've treated our son for years. The constant put-downs, the financial drain, the public humiliation. We love you, but we stand by Kyle's decision." I hung up, speechless. Had I been the only one who saw what was happening? I texted Kyle as a last resort, pledging to improve, to go to therapy, and to make a financial contribution. In a succinct reply, he said, "I hope you do all those things, Lindsay. Not for me, but for yourself and your next relationship. I've moved on." I sobbed until my eyes dried up, finally confronting the fallout from years of self-centered actions. 3 months have passed since Kyle's departure. Despite taking on additional jobs, I was forced to relocate to a small studio that I can hardly afford. To pay the security deposit, I sold the majority of my expensive clothes and cosmetics. In Poisson, fact, my TikTok following has increased. It turns out that while divorce drama garners viewers, it hasn't resulted in actual revenue. I attempted to start that phone case company, but after selling just 2 cases to sympathetic coworkers, I gave up. Last week, the divorce was finalized. Kyle was strict about not offering any continuing support, yet he was fair with our limited shared assets. He had changed in appearance when I saw him at the courthouse. In addition to the evident physical changes brought on by his ongoing exercise, he also exuded confidence in his demeanor. Wearing the same 3 outfits on a rotating basis since I can no longer afford to shop, I felt like a shadow of my former self. Witnessing the dissolution of my friend group has been one of the most difficult aspects. The majority of my friends turned out to be either Kyle's friends or their partners. Those invitations ceased to come without him. I made an effort to keep up certain connections, but when they learned I could no longer afford the shopping trips and breakfasts, the talks became unpleasant. Some friends openly expressed their satisfaction that Kyle had finally defended himself, saying they had always felt I treated him poorly. It hurt more than I thought it would. Although not in the manner I desired, my parents have been supportive. My mother advised me to learn how to live within my means rather than providing financial assistance. It was terrible when my dad actually helped me make a budget for the first time. I became aware of how much Kyle had been supporting my lifestyle when I saw my income versus expenses in black and white. In order to address some of the trends she had observed in my relationships, my mother even recommended treatment. Just to please her, I consented, but I stopped going after 2 sessions. Having someone point out my shortcomings without instantly improving my mood was too awkward. I occasionally go back and read my earlier posts, where I ridiculed Kyle's looks or bemoaned his lack of support for my business endeavors. Nowadays, I grimace at them, mostly because I realize how fortunate I was. rather than because I completely understand how harsh I was, though occasionally I do see glimmers of that. Even if I squandered that independence, I had someone who supported me and paid the expenses. A common buddy informed me yesterday that Kyle is seeing a new individual, a personal trainer he met at his gym. They shared a photo of themselves trekking. He appeared content, stronger, and healthier. Not only did I cry myself to sleep because he had gone on, but I also realized that I might be facing penalties for the first time in my adult life. Do I feel bad about what I did? In a way. I'm sorry about losing my financial security. I'm sorry I don't have someone to rely on. However, I still feel that Kyle overreacted, if I'm being totally honest. For example, aren't all couples making fun of one another? He was being too sensitive, wasn't he? And while I may have been wrong to spend so much money on beauty and clothing, he was unable to see the wider picture and that I was investing in my future. Now that the divorce drama has subsided, I am 28 years old, divorced, working at a job I detest, living in an apartment I can hardly afford, and having nothing to show for the past 5 years other than a few social media followers who are already losing interest. He was smacked and filed for divorce when I claimed he appeared to be a muscle-less youngster. I suppose it's my fault. I'm still unsure, though, if I was solely to blame. Perhaps we would still be together if he had simply tried harder to look, like the boys I liked online, or been less sensitive. While determining what I truly want to do with my life, I might still have my safety net. Perhaps Kyle's inability to comprehend me, rather than the other way around, was the true issue.